I'd like to introduce Clarice, who was an assistant professor at UCLA and a PI at Qubit, and is now the CSO and founder of QuantumBioDAO, as well as Rohan Dixit, who I'm actually very excited to hear more about. And so Rohan was actually a neuroscientist researcher at Stanford, who is going to give a little bit more from like a researcher plus patient perspective on long COVID. And then finally, we have Ishan, who actually, funny enough, worked in the same lab as me in UCSD, just 1 year apart. And he did a stint in Genentech, and he's more on the actually doing business development with the team at Base, which is incubated by Coinbase. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the idea of what on-chain is. I know we've used that term a little bit, and kind of what that means for self-sovereignty and data ownership and things like that.
Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining. So I guess to get started, nice, easy intro question. What are the benefits of funding to a BioDAO versus like traditional funding to like a foundation, philanthropy, or like traditional startup?
Should I start?
Please.
I would love to hear from you. I think probably the benefit is the people that are providing the capital have a very different outlook on life, almost. And this might sound funny, but like crypto people that are in crypto have generally a very long-term outlook on the future. You kind of have to if you're crazy enough to invest into things like Bitcoin early on, and then you're in part of these different communities. And for them, DeSci became this new interesting thing. Like, hey, I can now not also have access to this new potential like financial layer that might potentially work, but also I can invest into science. And so these people come with a very different kind of long-term outlook that actually aligns really well with some of the research that the scientists that we work with are funding. And so you come with a very different, non-bureaucratic, positive, optimist outlook. And then you also, through that, get much more community participation. So you might suddenly have a few biotech VCs in your community that are working for free because they're token holders and they're commenting on some of your research proposals. You might have folks that are helping you out with marketing, with community growth, that invite you to a conference to share with other crypto people that, again, bring in more capital. And so I think it's a very different way of accessing capital that comes potentially with much less strings attached than the current ways of accessing capital, which in many cases might be a biotech VC, might be some other deep tech venture fund, or could be funding from the public.
Cheers. I'll add some. Thanks for the question, Patrick. So hey everyone, I'm here from Base. For those of you that don't know, Coinbase launched its own blockchain last year called Base. Our goal is to build a global on-chain economy that advances creativity, innovation, and freedom. So I think the first part of the answer to your question is crypto is global. So people across the world, not just in the Western hemisphere, are going to be able to access these DeSci capital markets. And that's going to be a huge contributor. We saw with ResearchHub, we saw with some of the other projects today, the fact that these contributors are global and are from different parts of the world is a huge kind of differentiator as to why they're succeeding. So that's the first part, it's global. The second is the speed of capital formation. So we've seen this since like the early days of Bitcoin. We saw this with DeFi Summer, ICOs. With crypto and financial rails built on crypto, you can move money no matter the amount, no matter the distance, within seconds. So, I think with ResearchHub, you saw reviews done in 9 days. With Pump.Science, you see tokens like experiments being funded in hours, if not, less. So that capital formation can only really occur on crypto rails. So I think this global access and this speed is why DeSci is gaining so much traction.
So I'm Rohan from Long COVID Labs, and all of what was said, but what we were talking about over lunch was more about coordination mechanisms. And we're working in long COVID. It's a new disease, 100 million people at least that have it, no existing cures. A lot of the research that has gone into it over the last few years has been basic research, and now it's just starting to become commercialized, right? So a lot of that basic research was grant funding, as it typically is. And now a lot of those scientists that operated in this world of grant funding and essentially nonprofit work for the public good are starting to commercialize bits and pieces of the things that they worked on and turn them into private companies. And so now what we have in this space is just a real example of what I see happening is, multiple companies now, and so I'm sure there'll be dozens, where the incentives are no longer let's publish good science and try to find out how to cure long COVID. It's actually, I want my thing to work, and for my thing to work, to some degree, your thing needs to not work, and kind of the loss of resources, speed, and efficiency in that. And I think tokens can actually create an incentive mechanism in a new disease indication like long COVID, where if all these researchers were doing basic research and being compensated with tokens, those tokens could kind of carry over from that initial basic research all the way through the company formation stage, such that if my company wins, you're winning too, regardless of whether we take all the market share or not. And so I think there's incentive mechanisms that are interesting.
To me personally, something I find very inspiring about the BioDAOs is like, Paul, you were mentioning, like our biohacker, for instance, like you have this community of folks where like they have like, they're basically doing science on something that's personal to them. So for like HairDAO or like, long COVID labs, you can like bring folks together who are actually suffering from the conditions and allow them to like participate in like designing and executing the science and even like profiting from it. And so I wonder if you all can comment on sort of like the relationship within a BioDAO of how you like bring patients together with investors, with researchers. Like, how does that dynamic work in practice? And can you like actually capture the energy of folks who like have these conditions and, want to cure their own like health issues?
I'll start because I got the mic, and then I'll pass it down. But just briefly, I mean, I'm someone who had long COVID, so maybe I'm a perfect sort of example. 2.5 years of just kind of feeling desperate and trying things, reading the research, and then eventually self-experimenting. We just launched our website last week and announced our first trial and treatment candidate. And I mean, the response was huge. And I think that's because a lot of people are looking to and already are self-experimenting. And so I think just the energy around this that we've seen has been incredible.
So I won't talk about patients because at Quantum Biology we don't have patients, but humor me for a bit. Let me explain what quantum biology is, right? So, and I'll get to my point in a second. So quantum biology is the profound proposition that nature might be leveraging quantum physics for function. Here's why it's cool. We suspect, and we're set out to prove, that basal physiological functioning is bubbling with quantum phenomena that have possibly macroscopic consequences. And here's why you should care. I particularly work on a flavor of quantum biology that has to do with how biology interacts with weak magnetic fields, as weak as the magnetic field produced by your cell phone. And the cool thing is that with quantum biology, you get a new lever on how to actuate on basically the whole machinery of the cell using, for example, weak magnetic fields. So maybe one day, right now it's completely science fiction, you might have an app in your phone that you go there and you say, well, today I need help with wound healing. You click for the wound healing settings and your cell phone produces the magnetic field that you need for that particular application, and then you do this. So that's quantum biology. The quantum biology has been around for decades, and the field doesn't seem to break through. The community has been super fragmented and chronically underfunded, and I have super high hopes for the DAO to finally bring the community together. One thing that I'm particularly excited about is the possibility of offering grants for researchers, because there are no research grants for quantum biology at NSF, at NIH, and so forth. So I think the DAO is the perfect medium to bring this community together so that quantum biology finally breaks through, so that maybe in 10 years we will have a standing call on quantum biology at NSF, but before that we'll get the DAO to work.
Clarice, just to jump in there, sorry for interrupting. I met Clarice maybe like 3 or 4 years ago for the first time, and honestly was so tremendously inspired by the group of quantum biologists that you put together. I used to kind of like just shadow on the quantum biology journal clubs that you'd host, and was like genuinely blown away by the talent and passion within the community. I remember when I first met you, you were talking about how difficult it was to find like funding for quantum biology because it's a new field. There are like these ossified kind of funding structures. I wonder if you could just comment on the process that you've been through over the past couple of years looking for funding, and like why you see hope within the BioDAO.
So there's a reason why I left academia. I do think that with new crypto funding, we will be able to deploy capital much faster with a much smaller bureaucracy and
And can I add something? I actually think because when governance comes in, and then I want to hand it back. When governance comes in, it's not just that you're able to deploy funding faster. It's when the actual other scientists and experts that come in, and even some crypto person who you thought was just a crypto person, but they're actually really smart, actually start making the capital allocation decisions together. And so what we're seeing some of the DAOs do is essentially almost generate roadmaps or knowledge trees for their entire scientific field. Like, let's map it all out, and then let's start deciding where we're going to allocate that funding, and then through that get more and more funding in. And so I think it's not just
So, for example, if you want an example of that, we created a quantum biology ecosystem. It's like 3 different institutions, one of which is the DAO. And in the website, we have a technical roadmap that has been super useful to provide exactly what Paul said, like mapping the field and where things might go. And the technical roadmap can be found at www.quantumbiology.eco. And yeah.
Yeah, no, hard to jump in here, but I do think that the community-driven approach does kind of shine a light on one of the biggest issues within biopharma. When I was at Genentech, a lot of the portfolio was focused on treatments, not cure. So, extending overall survival or progression-free survival by 1 year, but not actually like changing the disease state or changing like the underlying cause of the indication. And when you look at things like HairDAO, I think the treatments that they're bringing forward are not only going to be cost-effective for patients, but they're actually likely going to be on the cure side versus just the treatment side. And we look at, I think you mentioned Ethan is working on a lot of rare diseases where there may only be a patient population of around, 500 or 1,000 individuals in the entire world that have this condition. So it's very important for them to, as a patient advocacy group, have like a Discord or have a community where they can share symptoms, they can share data, and then also encourage, fast, reproducible, and cost-effective research.
Actually, so Ethan came to our conference that we do in Berlin every year. If any of you are really interested in going deeper, we're doing DeSci Berlin. I don't think it's been announced that it's either in May or June next year again. Beautiful time to come to Berlin. And no, he came to this conference and he presented about some of the work that he's doing. It was the first DeSci conference that he came to, and he actually put this idea into my head. He's like, technically, the way that you work around your rare diseases, it's very difficult to scale one therapeutic into another area, or it's simply impossible because it's so specific. But the approach of how rare disease therapeutics are developed, that is potentially very scalable. So if you can solve it for one family and then another, there's a high chance that you can replicate that framework in the context of the DAO. The people that are working in the DAO can work with multiple families on multiple diseases. That's what Ethan is already doing. And so, that's where the science and the patient part actually gets super scalable and interesting.
Super cool. So I'm wondering, like, building these communities of like patients, investors, scientists. I know, like, when we've been trying to grow ResearchHub, like, there's challenges associated with like getting scientists introduced to crypto. And so I'm wondering, like, even like a term BioDAO, that's something new that folks have to learn. So I'm wondering, like, if you could comment on how you all kind of recruit new members in your communities. Like, how do you go about letting people know long COVID labs exist and like there's an outlet for folks to like put their energy towards like actually curing something that affects so many people?
Well, I'm laughing because I had to cut out earlier in the conference to talk to one of the leading scientists in long COVID space, and I was the first time pitched him on this idea, and it wasn't easy. I mean, I think there's a huge gap, and we're still figuring out what the right mechanisms are, and there aren't large success stories yet in the space either. So, I mean, that's always easy to point to. We don't have those yet. One thing that I think, coming from having worked in academia for at least a little bit of time, is this kind of noble pursuit that I think a lot of scientists, at least that I knew of, possess, which is this genuinely selfless idea that they wanted to create research that helped the world. And so there are ways, I think, to translate that into what DeSci is. It is a more, I think, could be, maybe is the right way to say it, it could be a more egalitarian way to do things like pharma development, pharma and drug development. And that's exciting, ways to bring along patients for the ride, particularly, we're dealing with long COVID where there's such a huge hundreds of millions of people, patient population. I think this is part of what is exciting about the approach for DeSci, but I don't have a good answer for how to pitch scientists yet. And I think this is one of the first places where I've seen these two groups together, and I don't know how the conversations are going thus far. Maybe you guys should tell us, but I think it's important to have these conversations.
I have a suggestion that has to do with what Patrick said. So I've been organizing weekly meetings for the quantum biology community, research seminars that bring people together, and I've found that this is extremely effective in making people show up. Two things that we're going to pioneer soon is that we're also going to start a weekly community call with the DAO community, open to anyone. And once our lab is set up, we hope to open our weekly lab meetings to the community to be streamed in YouTube. So I think that regularly engaging with people over seminars or lab meetings and so forth is an idea.
Yeah, this is definitely a critical question because we want to grow the pie of DeSci. We want to grow the pie of crypto. We don't want it to just be the same 200,000 users or individuals that are transacting. So I definitely think, showing case studies or having like weekly events is part of that playbook. Something that we've done at Coinbase to bring developers that don't code in Solidity or Rust is meet these developers where they currently are. So, create packages within JavaScript. I think maybe like within DeSci, the analogy there would be like, use existing publications from their lab and show like how using ResearchHub type of networks, they can be like proofread. So I think meeting the scientists where they are is an effective strategy. Another thing is what you're doing with Pump Science and Catalyst, just creating new design spaces for DeSci that will attract different audiences within crypto to start actually paying attention to DeSci as a vertical.
You mentioned the speed of capital earlier. So the last project that we put up onto Catalyst yesterday raised, Benji, do you know how much ETH? 67 ETH, which is about $200,000 in under 30 minutes, and then it was sold out. This was a synthetic biology project. Since then, we said like, okay, no, let's figure out what's actually going on here. So the other really interesting point that you just mentioned, which is like, I actually think decentralized science is really interesting also to the broader crypto market, because I think the broader crypto market for years has kind of suffered a stigma of it's a bunch of bros and it's a casino and you guys are trading meme coins and like monkey pictures, like let's get serious. And actually crypto has had this problem because like you can get more developers in, but you're not really getting new users in. Like it is actually often the same capital that moves around, and like yes, a lot of every time the number goes up a lot, new people come in, but then often when the number goes down again, the people are gone again. And so I actually think the really interesting thing here is like, why is this interesting to the crypto market? And I'm saying this to anyone who potentially thinks about working in DeSci, is the crypto market actually really wants this. So you're not going to have we had a hard time for a while. It hasn't been an easy ride. However, now what I think the actual potential here is to bring in scientists and solve real problems for them, or bring in patients and solve real problems for them. And I think and there's a lot of scientists out there, but there's even more patients. And so I think the really beautiful thing here is solving a problem for two sides. You can solve a problem for patients who have been just chronically, I think, disenfranchised from value creation in biotech and pharma. And then you can, on the other side, you can solve a problem for scientists, chronically underappreciated, in my view, underpaid, underappreciated around the world. And so again, solving a problem for them is also really interesting. Yeah.
Totally, like the presentation on Froze earlier, where you can pay a scientist a Series A startup salary, and they're just so stoked about it. So, yeah, 100% agree. So, Ishan, I have a question for you. I know with our peer review bounty program, like one of the things that has been challenging in the past is like if you earn $150 for a peer review, and then you want to withdraw that to your own like self-custody wallet, and there's a significant gas fee on Ethereum, like folks can be a little frustrated if they only get like 130, 120 $20 like after the transaction fee. And so we integrated with Base. It's infinitely better. It's like a quarter or something, depending on the time. And people are much happier about getting $149.75 rather than $130 or something. I'm wondering if you can like comment a little bit on like some of the work that Base is doing to help make onboarding easier and like what that will look like in the future to try and like help some of the UX problems that scientists see with DeSci.
Yeah, I would love to. Maybe by a show of hands, how many people here own Ethereum? Okay, and then keep your hands up. How many people have transacted with that Ethereum? Have sent it from Okay, so thank you. Anyone who has used Ethereum on the layer 1 network right now, when they transact, you experience anywhere between a $5 upwards to $100 fee. And this is because Ethereum is just a proof of stake network. There's a lot of demand for the block space. And when you look at any kind of application that requires microtransactions or payments, it doesn't really make sense to have a $5 to $100 fee when maybe the amount that you're transferring is just $1. So over the course of the past 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of research done into scaling Ethereum, scaling blockchains, making it such that they're high throughput. They can do anywhere between 1,000 upwards to 100K transactions per second. This reduces the cost, increases the throughput. So I think as it relates to peer reviews, you might have that individual in Brazil who's earning 150 per peer review and is very happy. And now it's as important to make sure that they earn that 150, but also equally important to make sure that they can off-ramp it into their local currency without being gouged with fees like as you would with a centralized bank service or a layer 1 blockchain. So at Base, currently we're doing, I believe, 1 to 2 billion in volume every day. We're doing around 700 transactions per second. We recently hit 10 billion in volume on assets. So I think everything that Base is focused on is essentially scaling Ethereum, not replacing it, but making it such that applications like DeSci, ResearchHub, anything that requires payments can happen in an actual realistic way. Yeah.
Super cool. So, Paul, I have a question about the BioDAOs in general, and I don't mean this to be a gotcha whatsoever. It just popped up in my head.
Yeah, of course.
So, like, all the BioDAOs you guys have made so far are so cool. Like, quantum biology, like, it's amazing. Like, these are genuinely inspiring projects where it's like, this is going to make the world a much better place, if this all works out. I'm wondering, like, how does the curation work of who can create a BioDAO? Like, if John Cumbers wants to create like a body replacement BioDAO, like walk me through kind of like how that works, and like, do you need approval or like, what's the process like?
Yeah, really good question. We actually just had an application from an organ replacement DAO. Funny topic. So we previously BioXYZ was run by Molecule, and it was run like an accelerator. So people could, there was a form to fill out, you could apply. Initially, what happened was the DeSci ecosystem really came to life in late 2021, early 2022. And I just got a bunch of Twitter DMs from people that were like, this is so cool. But this was after we built VitaDAO. I want to build the VitaDAO for X. And so then it was really organic, acceptable into a cohort. And then also there was a period where people stopped building in DeSci because kind of the first wave was over. And so then we were really building with those founders for almost until now. And the future of how it looks though, and so we recently had the pleasure to kind of start our second cohort. As I presented earlier, the future of what it looks like though is really, and so this is now governed by token holders. The future of what it looks like though is really a permissionless launchpad or semi-permissioned through bio-token holders. So bio-token holders continuously accept DAOs to join the launchpad. And then in the launchpad, bio-token holders essentially bet on which DAOs they want to support and essentially purchase ownership in. And the DAOs then rise to the top of a leaderboard and then spin off and become autonomous as they hit different goals. Or as they hit different kind of milestones in that leaderboard, they get access to more and more tooling through a network of bio-token holders. But yeah, to answer your question, it used to be run like from us as a team, and now it's happening through token holder governance. And then increasingly, there won't actually be actual governance proposals around it anymore, but you really kind of like betting on which DAOs you want to have in the system and actively curating it. But the one thing to add there's a financial incentives as well, because each DAO kind of consumes resources from the network and then also receives bio. So each of the bio DAOs that join, vice versa, bio receives some of their tokens, and then they also receive bio in return, which they can later on use for their own kind of liquidity management or market making. And so bio token holders actually need to actively think, is this DAO going to add value? Is it going to succeed? And are we happy to kind of almost inflate because we'll give some of those tokens away? And so now if you had let's say a ethically questionable DAO join, I don't know, a DAO trying to work on scheduled substances, or a DAO working on novel viruses, it can be whatever. Token holders could choose to, no, we don't want to accept that DAO because we actually see it bringing risk to the network potentially, or it just kind of not aligning with our values. Yeah.
Oh, super interesting. That's really cool. I'm wondering, like, when you guys were doing the semi-permission version, what's like the most obscure idea that got pitched to you?
James, can you?
Oh my god.
What's the most obscure one?
We just spaced out black. That was actually.
We actually had a bunch of space DAOs, yeah.
Yeah. I would say that there's a lot of really interesting genetic engineering DAOs that are ethically questionable.
One intelligence DAO?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Super IQ DAO.
Fascinating.
One thing that was important to us early on is that the DAOs have a good, almost like crypto market fit. Meaning, if like a scientific area can be super exciting, but if it doesn't have a large patient population, or if it's too I don't want to say boring, because all science is technically exciting, but some is more exciting than others. And excitement is always in the eye of the observer. So I want to say that. But so for instance, when we heard about Clarice, or got in touch with Clarice, there were already a lot of crypto people that are really excited about quantum and quantum mechanics and quantum biology. And so that was like, okay, we can find some really gigabrain crypto people that are also really excited about this. And so that was an early kind of criteria. In fact, the crazier and more moonshot the science, the better, because crypto people have a high risk appetite. And it's also why I know Brian Armstrong, for instance, is really interested in longevity, and a lot of Vitalik is as well, Balaji, and so that's one of, I think, partially what also led to the success of VitaDAO, that it had a really strong crypto market fit with mind share. Which I think can be really important. I increasingly think Brian actually popped into our Discord in the early days and was like, "Hey guys," Brian Armstrong, we were like, "Whoa!" so that was really cool. But I actually increasingly think that's going to become less and less important. We're really trying to build the right tooling. Ultimately, it's about the power of a community. And so if something is so small and so detailed that there's just a very small community, it might be hard to build a DAO around it, because a DAO thrives off of being a community. In that case, though, it might be more effective to just do direct financing into that research, as some of the other projects that I showed. I think for that to really work well, the market is still quite small. But ultimately, I think the tooling around this should get so good that you shouldn't have to convince a bunch of crypto people that you think should exist. Just like you should be able to create a community around it, and then you tell, if you're already in that patient or research community, you tell your friends about it, and they're able to join without downloading a complex wallet or buying a token. I think we can make these onboarding systems good enough for people to come congregate. And then the second thing I actually think is what we're trying to build with the newer DAOs is that it's much more important, I think, to build a nucleus of scientific and patient activity, actually have a token holder base that doesn't include anyone from crypto initially, that is just kind of comprised of those people. Because if you can show that, if you can show, hey, we have 100 patients here that are already token holders and they're doing this and this in terms of value creation, then it's very easy for crypto people to get involved in that. So I actually think it's much more important to do the really hard work, which is convincing, I think the scientists and the long COVID patient communities, for instance, that this is relevant. Because if you can do that, the crypto people definitely gonna come. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a really compelling idea to be able to financially support folks who are trying to actively cure their own conditions. It's very compelling. I guess the last question I have before we can open up to the audience is so say I'm watching a live stream and I have long COVID, or I want to get into quantum biology. What's the next step for me? How do I get involved in these BioDAOs?
Our DAO is located at quantumbiology.xyz, and the Discord is at quantumbiology.community. You can join and talk to us.
And we're at longcovidlabs.org. We're on Reddit. So come join us there if you have treatment ideas, you want to comment on the existing leaderboard for potential treatments or our first candidate. And we're also on Twitter at longcovidlabs, at longcovidlabs.
Patrick, maybe I can kick off one of the Q&A for the panelists. Assuming liquidity in crypto continues to move at its current pace and attention and mindshare of DeSci continues to rise, what does success look like for each of your DAOs? So, Paul, on your end, is it the number of DAOs that you incubate? Is it like regulatory approval? On your end, is it like engagement with KOLs? Is it the growth of your community? Curious like how you're trying to benchmark success as you move into 2025 and the heart of this bull cycle.
Yeah, I mean, for us, and I was a patient, right? I mean, the number one most important thing is curing people. Hopefully, that's what the name of the game is, and the mechanism is honestly they don't care, and really at some level no one does. It's can you do the thing? So our first 5 patients will be published as a case study. Then we're doing 30, which will be our decentralized trial. We're working now with some universities on a much larger trial, which will be sort of more rigorous but much more expensive. And so there's this phased approach to doing research, which then I think, coming from the perspective of, oh my God, there's 100 million people at least who have this. How do you scale that? A research study has at most hundreds or thousands of people. I mean, this is just orders of magnitude far away from being able to actually make an impact in this disease condition. That's where things, I think, take a perspective. So academia, oftentimes you're trying to prove something. With a startup, maybe you're trying to scale. And so I think the intersection of those two things is very exciting for these BioDAOs. And for Long COVID DAO in particular, and Long COVID Labs, we're focused on what can we do that will prove that mechanistically we're making an impact and we're curing a disease to the level of science and to the level of rigor that I think scientists can accept. And that's important. But the other piece of this that I think is equally as important, if not more so, is how do you then scale that to get to as many people as possible? And the scale of things are in the millions. And so that's what a lot of what we'll be tooling for and planning for next year, but we won't get there in 2025.
For me, success is going to be getting quantum biology science done, both by our lab, by other researchers, and by citizen scientists, so that we can accomplish this really transformative potential that I see in quantum bio.
Cool. On the base side, we want 1 million developers, 1 billion users, and 1 trillion in assets on chain.
I think for me, success would probably look like that. We actually have an increasing amount of experiments funded. So I think on the one side, there's really interesting concepts around autonomously funding experiments where volume generated, trading volume is actually funding experiments, which drives more trading volume and so on and so forth. On the other side, I think with success will really be in clinical trials. Clinical trials, and then just moving more and more scientists on chain. I actually think, and I know, Patrick, you're working on a similar thing. I thought this really early on, if we can just make scientists rich or just a little bit richer and have them participate in this, we've won. Because I think they're just going to attract more and more scientists, and the scientists are going to be like, this is great, finally. My work is being appreciated. It's a very simplified way of actually thinking about how could success look like. With rich, I don't mean rich, actually being involved and their work, their contributions being appreciated, because that will attract more scientists and they'll tell their friends. And What about you, Patrick?
Oh, success for us. One thing I wanted to say is Brian always talks about how if you talk to 16, 17, 18-year-olds, it's they want to be social media influencers. And so what you guys are doing, I think, is so powerful, where it's we can make some rock star scientists and inspire the next generation to really double down on this knowledge creation in the way that we actually improve the world. So I find it tremendously inspiring what you all are doing.
I also think we can have rockstar scientists that are way younger. I don't think there's been a scientific 21 or 22 year whiz kid forever. Can we make the next Mark Zuckerbergs, but of science, but by enabling them to build very quickly, and empowering them with resources in the same way that startups enabled that for tech entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. So I guess any questions in the audience?
Hey, thanks. That was fascinating. I work on phase 3 trials. I'm quite interested in that jump to phase 3. That's where the costs really spike up. And I just wonder, how does the model work when you move to there? Obviously, in traditional biotech, oftentimes you get an acquisition at that point from big pharma. But what's happening if the DAO owns the intellectual property?
Really interesting question. I think at that point, you do the same thing that you do in biotech today. You partner. So you partner, or you would try to sell the asset. I don't think DAOs. maybe this changes in a couple of months, who knows? But I don't think the DAOs have the kind of capital or treasuries yet. No, have the kind of capital or treasury yet to even finance a stage 1 or stage 2 trial. I think stage 1 can be done. I think stage 2 already gets quite difficult. Stage 3, definitely not. But ultimately, there is definitely actually enough capital in crypto to do this. We have to remember that pharma companies are really today. They used to be different in the 80s and up until the 80s and up until the 90s. They used to do a lot of fun basic research, do a lot of preclinical work themselves, but they've moved really out of those stages completely and just to being capital allocators and risk assessors. The DAOs can do a similar thing. So, does anyone remember Constitution DAO? Okay. See, remember that moment in time when Constitution was at 60 million or something? So it's like, okay, this DAO, for anyone that doesn't know the story, this DAO formed spontaneously. Some people on Twitter had this idea to buy the Constitution, or one of them that was being sold off to some hyper rich hedge fund guy. And they were like, no, the people should own the Constitution. So this DAO formed, and within like 1 or 2 days raised 60 million through a crowdfunding platform. And so if we take that as an example, actually, if there was like, hey, we have a cure here for X, but we need to pay, we need 100 million for a stage 2 or a stage 3 trial. And if it is just a question of capital, there's obviously the whole coordination part with the FDA, the political ties, the paperwork that you need for that, and then the time duration. But crypto is extremely good at capital formation, and nothing would in principle stop you from saying, I need $200 million. If it goes viral enough and patients start caring, I do actually think it is feasible to shoulder the capital requirements.
Do you see that then as the inflection point where suddenly traditional science wakes up and realizes what's going on, when you get that first high-profile acquisition or that phase 3 trial?
I think the trial is much more powerful than the acquisition. If you had probably not even maybe either the financing of the trial or the actual, like, let's say the trial is approved. Like, let's say, imagine you had a drug that was approved through a system like this. Like, I think like those are the breakout points. I think you really need people to care. So like if it's like, hey, we did an M&A, we sold the thing that we developed and now we got some money back and we're putting that further, it's less interesting probably than actual something that impacts people's lives. Yeah.
Just one possible strategy on phase 3 trials, you can use synthetic control arms, which are only possible if you have standard of care data on patients within that disease. So if you have like this community of patients that's contributing to this DAO, it's very likely that them or someone in their patient network is able to contribute to standard of care data. And that will, reduce your drug development costs by up to 50%, also reduce the timelines between 1 to 2 years. So that's another way in which, when they're at the phase 3 trial mark, they can accelerate it and do it cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can tap into the patient database to actually recruit into the trial as well. So fantastic.
Are you guys doing research actively on how to get scientists involved in this, and also how to establish what you were describing, Paul, as the market fit between like the specific research that's being done and then people who are into crypto who are early stage financiers of these kinds of DAOs?
I mean, like the meta science of DeSci?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a social scientist and a UX researcher, so I'm like 100%. Invested in this question personally. So I think it'd be interesting research.
No, it makes a lot of sense. No, we're not doing that yet. But I think it probably would be, really valuable. From an entrepreneurial perspective, I'm always like, people don't know what they want until you kind of give it to them. That's one thing. But then I think,
then you test it while you're giving it to them, right?
Yeah, 100%. But I think in terms of Clarice, you just came back. You just came back from a large week-long crypto event in Bangkok, which is DevCon 7, which is the leading Ethereum developer conference. Clarice, what do you feel the reception has been to your research from crypto people?
Awesome. I think people are, again, I come from academia, and I think that the people that I met, they are completely open-minded and willing to entertain all sorts of hypotheses, and I came back very excited about the potential of that.
I also came back quite genuine.
So I think Jeff's going to start playing the music on me here really quick, and I think it basically wraps up the day. So thank you all very much for the panel and for all our attendees. This is a lovely time. Thank you very much, everyone. We very much appreciate you being here.